Okay, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our User Experience Design introductory course. My name is Christian Draper, as I mentioned yesterday, and hopefully you've been able to think a little bit more deeply about the user experience design process. I wanted to just introduce myself a little bit more today because I didn't introduce much of myself yesterday. I am a user experience designer. I've been working in the field for more than a decade, in the design field, about 15 years as well. And I started out in newspapers, and I was a designer for newspapers and then gravitated toward the digital design field. I actually went back to school and got a master's degree in youth and family recreation, which was sort of leisure studies, which is something that people made fun of me for, studying how to play. But then I went and got a doctorate, a PhD in instructional psychology and technology. And while I was doing that, I got steeped into the world of user experience design. And my dissertation is actually about the user experience design experience of people who design instruction. So I feel right at home here sharing this information with you. And user research is what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm excited to share with you some of the methodology and tools that we use in user experience design. All right, let's talk about the product design cycle again. We introduced this cycle yesterday when we were talking. And the discovery phase is a time where designers seek to understand the user in the context and in relation to the product. It's a time for digging deep and finding out information that will help you be able to show empathy for users and to be able to help them, help you as a designer be guided in the process of thinking of new ideas that will help people. So the research that we do in user experience comes in two forms. First, in discovery, the most useful form of research tends to be qualitative research, which consists of gathering non-numeric data about the various qualities of an entity or an environment. For example, interviews that don't collect counted answers tend to be qualitative in nature. Surveys with open-ended questions and observational research are both good examples of qualitative research as well. One form of research that is especially useful to user experience designers is called contextual inquiry. And contextual inquiry consists of observing users in the circumstances in which they would actually use the product that you are attempting to design. Contextual inquiry is a form of ethnographic research. Its objective is to describe and in many instances help you as a designer view a culture or a people or a type of user with certain problems, view them with empathy. The better you know and understand a person and their circumstances and experiences, the better you are able to formulate and articulate ideas that will help improve the experiences that they have. The other prominent form of data gathering in user experience research is quantitative research, which consists of the collection and analysis of numerical data. Surveys with responses that are counted in some way are an example of quantitative research. So I wanted to just introduce one form of quantitative data gathering that's used in the user experience design world, and that's called the system usability scale. And this is not something that I'm expecting you to understand and be able to use right away, but I wanted to introduce it as a way that people in the user experience design can help actually measure a user experience and give it a quantitative data that then can be measured and make changes that are designed to improve that, and then you can measure it again and see how usable something is. The system usability scale uses constructs on a 5-point scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And this is an example of what that system usability scale looks like. It's got 10 questions. Just some examples, I'll read a few of them. I think that I would like to use this system frequently. I found the system unnecessarily complex. I thought the system was easy to use. I think that I would need the support of a technical person to be able to use this system. I found the various functions in this system were well integrated. These questions are all fairly similar, but the researchers have found that by asking all 10 of these questions and then measuring them, people give an answer on how they feel. And those answers are then converted to a number based on the type of question they are. Odd numbers are computed one way and even numbers another. And the final score comes out as on a scale of 1 to 100. It gives you a sense of how usable the product is compared to other products. So this isn't a percentage necessarily, but something like a 60 to 70 would be a pretty good user experience. Once you get up to 80, it's one of the high class, top 99 percentile. So this scale is something that people use in quantitative user experience research to help them understand how easily people can use a system. Analytics are another form of quantitative data that can be informative in the discovery phase. Many companies install code in their web applications or their websites or mobile applications, and that code counts the activity of people using their site or their application. For example, it might count how many visitors you have on any given day. Analytics programs also allow you to set up and record specific interactions with the site, and these are called events. Those events can be counted. You can see how many times the event occurred, when it occurred, what time of day that event occurs most frequently. And there are enormous amounts of data that get collected each second on the web, and the user experience designer can often access that data to try to make assumptions and draw conclusions about who is using the site or the app and for what purpose. And thus, because they're able to sort of digest all these numbers, they can hypothesize why people are using those applications in the way they are, and then make improvements, recommended improvements for the system. This course is not long enough for us to get into the details of analytics, but I just wanted to introduce you to that idea that many applications have that ability to actually measure each click, each touch, and see how people use it. The results of A/B and multivariate testing, where different designs are compared statistically, can also be informative in the discovery phase, but they're more often used to validate design solutions. Those are examples of quantitative research methods. The early stages of user research consists of acts of discovery. User research is exploratory. In user experience design, there are generally two roles that you play as a user experience designer. One is to create new experiences where none existed before, thus filling a gap. But the other thing that user experience designers sometimes do is iterate on and improve an existing experience, thus smoothing the surface of an existing established product. In both cases, you use user research to understand the circumstances of a person's existing paradigm. You are seeking to understand the user. Without that understanding, you cannot design adequate and appropriate solutions to the gaps and the rough experiences people endure each day. The discovery phase, being an inductive process, really digs in deep for that understanding. Once a designer has a good concept of what a user is currently experiencing in the design scenario, they are better able to design hypotheses that will move the process of design forward. Empathy. I mentioned this before, that empathy is something you're striving for, and it's getting into somebody else's shoes and walking around for a while. It's seeing what they see and how they see it. No one can be perfectly empathetic, but empathy can be learned and cultivated. People drawn to user experience design tend to have a more developed sense of empathy, but empathy is a soft skill that can be honed and improved. And empathy comes most easily through systematic and direct observation and listening to people. It can be refined by pushing back against the biases and assumptions that naturally occur to us as human beings. And the closer we get to the actual life circumstances of our users as they use or would use our products, the better we will be able to make informed decisions about our designs. Data from research informs ideation and the rest of the design process. And the more accurate and realistic the data, the better our designs can be. So we're going to talk now about a few methods of research that you could potentially use in your design process. And the methods span from direct observation to indirect observation, and from direct inquiry to indirect inquiry. And these, like the design process itself, are not necessarily discrete types of inquiry that always happen independently. They overlap and run into each other and just collide at times, but it's helpful to have names for these activities and to be able to discuss them, to be able to learn them. And so we'll present these research activities in the context of a designer hoping to create a new shopping mobile application. Contextual inquiry is something I mentioned before. It's the direct observation method of user research. It is an ethnographic technique, as I mentioned, and where you shadow a user throughout the day, or at a minimum for a period of time when they would normally be using your application or be likely to use your product or service that you are planning to design. In our example, Ruth contacts 5 mothers she knows and asks them to participate in her research. She explains to each of them that she will spend most of the day with them and just follow them around. And 3 mothers agree to participate. First, Ruth goes to Jennifer's house and sits down at her table and watches as Jennifer starts going about making her meals. Ruth jots down notes in a notebook as she watches. She notes Jennifer keeps her cereal high in the pantry closet. And she notes the breakfast starts promptly at 7:30 a.m. Ruth tries to capture each task that Jennifer tackles. She notes when Jennifer struggles, when she pauses for a long time. Ruth goes with Jennifer as she drops her youngest child off at daycare. Now, if we're creating a shopping app and we think about the user, sometimes we think just the context of where they're actually shopping. But understanding the context before a shopping trip and after a shopping trip really opens our eyes and our minds to what might be going on in the user's heart and mind as they're going about these tasks. That's why this is such a powerful technique. So next, Ruth and Jennifer go to the store, and Ruth notes the path Jennifer takes through the store. She watches Jennifer compare prices. She notes how many she compared, whether she picked up items or whether she just looked at them and reads the labels without touching. Each step throughout the store, and then back home again, Ruth watches Jennifer's actions. She takes notes about her observations, jots down ideas she might consider later, notes the time and the location of each note and event that's happening. At the end of the day, they part ways. Ruth begins the process again for each of the others who agreed to participate, watching and taking notes. Sometimes she would ask a question, trying to get into the minds of the women she is watching. What are you thinking about right now? Why did you do that? Ruth's aim is not to spur the women to answer in a specific way, but to get them talking about some of the tacit and implicit things that are going on in their minds as they take action. Ruth next does what's called a competitive analysis, looking at other shopping applications that exist. What do they do well? What might they be missing? So she contacts some new people and invites them to the office. She has them use the apps and talk about what they're doing. This is called a usability study, and we'll talk more about those in the testing phase, where a usability study might be used to find out how well a product works once it's created. But here she's trying to see how people use the app that exists, what works for them, what doesn't. She gives them specific scenarios, goals for the user to achieve with the app. and then she watches to see what obstacles the user and the customer has as they attempt to achieve those goals. She notes where they struggle, where they succeed, and what excites or delights them. And from the notes that she gleans from this research, Ruth is ready to move on to the definition phase of the product design cycle. But let's imagine the scenario a little bit differently. Ruth has limited time. She can't follow multiple people around for a day. She decides to try some indirect observation to gather the same type of information she gained in the previous scenario. She recruits 4 participants to do a diary study for her. One of those she recruited previously, who hadn't been willing to be followed around, is willing to do a diary study. And each of the participants carries around a notebook or a recorder for the next day. And every 15 minutes, they write or record what they're doing at that moment, along with their thoughts about their activities. Ruth gets the notebooks or recordings and reads or listens to them again to gain insights about their activities. Ruth looks up analytics data from the web for any shopping apps she can find. She finds out how many people are using shopping apps. She looks for marketing data about the demographics of shoppers. When do they shop? How old are they? What are they buying? This is indirect because it's not observing them or having them write down some tasks as they're doing it. You're going back and indirectly trying to observe actions that happened previously. Ruth also spends a day going and doing in-depth interviews as a form of direct inquiry with potential users of her shopping application. She recruited through her social network, gathering friends of friends and friends of friends' friends. 5 people agree to come in, and so in one long day, she conducts 5 one-hour interviews with half an hour in between each interview. To prepare, Ruth creates a guide that contains multiple questions she can ask, along with some probe questions. And Ruth asks a fellow user experience designer to listen to the interview live and be with her and take notes so that she can concentrate on the conversation itself. Gathering this data will allow her to begin the definition phase of the design process without as much time-consuming experience as the direct observation might take. Indirect inquiry is another method that is even further removed from the interaction with the user. One form of indirect inquiry is the survey. Surveys are able to gather information from users about their experiences asynchronously. That means you can send it out at any time and just receive them as people have a chance to fill them out. Surveys are potentially dangerous in that writing useful questions that will result in quality data is a skill that requires practice. Questions that are too broad result in imprecise data. Ambiguous questions result in meaningless data, and multiple choice questions can potentially miss the nuance of the human experience. But surveys have great potential for getting a clear picture of trends across many individuals, and that allows potentially for statistical extrapolation. It means if you get a big enough group of people responding to your survey, then you can assume that the findings at a certain statistical level are accurate for everybody in your intended audience. And that's something that the direct observation and interviews are not as able to do because you just can't get as many people to represent. Clayton Christensen is a marketing professor, and his well-known milkshake case study offers a cautionary tale about the importance of getting closer to the user and probing for greater understanding of their needs. He formulated a product methodology based on the research that they did, and it's called jobs to be done. The concept basically goes like this. A fast food restaurant began marketing research based on the product, a milkshake, and they researched around the demographics of their milkshake customers. They sought to find out from members of that demographic what makes the best milkshake. Customers told them, and the company responded to that feedback, trying to improve the milkshake based on that feedback. After implementing the improvements, they saw no change in sales. One of Christensen's colleagues did a deeper dive, and he observed customers buying milkshakes through a whole day. He found that 40% of them actually bought them in the morning and left the restaurant before consuming them. So he came back the next day and asked people who bought them in the morning and then left, "What job are you trying to get this milkshake to do?" And it turned out that most of those morning consumers needed something to help them get through their morning commute. They only had one hand to drive with, and the milkshake, they were often hungry as well around 10 o'clock in the morning. They weren't hungry in the morning when they were leaving, but they knew they would be hungry later. The milkshake helped keep their free hand occupied and also allow them to eat without having to use both hands. The shake lasted a long time, so it helped keep them engaged in the long commute, and it also helped them avoid hunger pains until lunchtime. The competitors in the category with that milkshake might be something like bagels or bananas or toast or coffee. And the restaurant could have responded to this idea by creating a new product, marketing it to those morning consumers. A morning milkshake, thicker and will tide you over for the rest of the day. So trying to understand what job a user needs to have done allows you to craft better products and experiences. And it's an example of the power of observational research and qualitative research. So conducting interviews, there's a few best practices. Today, I want to emphasize the interview because it's one of the easiest things that you can do as a user experience designer that will pay dividends, because there's many companies that have a hard time devoting the resources to something more in-depth like contextual inquiry. But doing an interview, you can often do several interviews and find a lot of information that'll be very useful. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then today's assignment is going to be going through and actually doing an interview yourself. And hopefully you were able to contact someone to be able to interview after this lecture. So the first best practice is have a notepad. If you're interviewing over the phone or a computer connection, you can take notes on the laptop. But generally speaking, you want to avoid using your computer to take notes in a face-to-face situation. Computers can form a psychological barrier between the researcher and the subject. It reduces your ability to build a sufficient rapport with that subject, that person, and for them to open up fully and share their honest experience. So notebook, and have a pen or pencil and a backup pen or pencil. So in case the lead breaks or run out of ink, you've got something to go. The best thing for an interview is for an interviewer to open up to is to have everything run smoothly and not run into any roadblocks. But that being said, don't rely on notes. Don't take copious notes. Spending time taking too many notes can disrupt the flow of the conversation and make subjects begin to close down their thoughts. To take notes, one best practice that I like to do is to jot down a time code from your recorder as you're recording, along with a keyword to help you jog your memory when you go back to review. So that might look like at 22 seconds, they say, "Hate shopping on weekends." You can really quickly write those 4 words and get back into the flow of the conversation. Going back, you could look at the recorder when 22 seconds happens and you say, "Oh, let's listen to that whole statement and see exactly what they were saying." So that brings up the idea of a recorder. Have a recorder, and ideally a backup recorder. Most people have smartphones, and there are numerous apps you can use to record voice. Ideally, you want a device that will allow you to export your audio to as files, as an MP3, so you can re-listen and take better notes on a computer, or even send off to a service like rev.com that does transcription, which is super helpful when you have a team that needs to be able to review the notes. There are also services that can be used to record interviews over the phone, something like Zoom, and there are other audio conferencing companies that have a free service that allows you to record. Just make sure that you always let the person know that you're recording them. It's the law in some states, and it's just general courtesy in others. The next thing that you need for an interview is to make sure you remember to cover all the questions that you need to cover by writing an interview guide. Generally, you want to aim for one primary question for every about 5 minutes of interview, with 1 or 2 probe questions that could help you dig deeper if you need something to draw more information out. As you get going in an interview, it is often easy to just go with the flow of the conversation, but you must remember that you have specific objectives for the interview, and having those objectives and questions in front of you helps you keep on track and not forget anything important. So I'm going to open the interview guide. Let's try that again. Okay, research interview guide. This is something that I usually have a template for, and so I'm often just duplicating the guide that I have and then adapting it for the current research purpose. So in this case, I want to have an objective just as a reminder to myself, or if I have a team that I'm trying to have help me do interviews, to make sure that they know what the purpose of the interview is and make sure that everybody's on the same page there. In this case, I wrote, to better understand the experiences people have with the shopping in a brick and mortar store, understanding their experience will give us insights and empathy to find ways to improve their shopping experience through digital or other tools. So just made clear, we're looking at the shopping experience and keeping in mind that there might be some way to improve that experience for people. The next thing I have an interview guide is an introduction. And I almost always use the same introduction. It's just slightly tweaked each time. It says, hi participant, my name is Christian Draper. I'm going to be asking you a few questions during this session. Let me explain a little more why we've asked you to participate in this interview today. We're interested in understanding more about people's experiences with in-person brick and mortar shopping. For more details, I can understand the more details I can understand about your offline shopping experiences, the better we'll be able to create products that could help enhance that experience. I want to make it clear right away that you are not being tested. There are no right or wrong answers. We want to hear exactly what you think, so please don't worry that you're going to hurt our feelings. We want to improve our designs, so we need to know honestly what you think. You don't have to answer all my questions. You're free to stop the interview at any time. We will also not publish your answers outside of our team. We'll just be using this information internally to help guide our design efforts. Is it okay for me to record this conversation? Recording helps me so I don't have to take as many notes. So I will almost always read that verbatim, and it's okay to just tell somebody, you know, I've got something I need to share with you, and I'm just going to read it to you so that I don't forget anything. Then you just read it to them. They're good with it, and they understand all the things that you wanted to say. So if there's anything that you know that you need to tell somebody before you get going on an interview, always sort it in the introduction and then just read it. When I'm doing interviews, I almost always have a printed copy that I can refer to, so I don't have to rely on the digital technologies that are so often ready to break and when we need them most. All right, so the next thing are a list of questions. So you can see it's just a fairly short list. And I ask them to please think back to your most recent visit to a store. When was that visit? What store did you go to? What was your reason for going there? What did you purchase? These are basically probe questions. I would start with, what store did you go to? What was your reason for going there? And then if needed to draw the story out, ask them about their purchase. What did you purchase that you had not planned to purchase before entering the store? What were you doing before going to the store? Where did you go afterwards? Who was with you? What did they do while you were in the store? What kind of a list did you use, if any? How did you carry your shopping items while you were in the store? Tell me about your checkout experience. And then if you get through that, it's fairly succinct, you can't really get them to expound on it, then just go back to one step to a previous shopping experience. Now, the point of doing that that interview guide and questions and asking them for a specific instance is that people tend to tell you in averages. So if you say, what is it like when you go shopping? They'll think and sort of combine different experiences. And so you're not really getting an accurate representation of what it's actually like at an actual shopping experience. They've sort of amalgamated all of their experiences together and say, I usually do this and I usually do this. But if you actually ask them a specific thing, they would actually say, well, I didn't do it that time because this happened and that happened. So if that makes sense. So what, oops. Let's talk about actually conducting interviews. I have actually asked Boomer, our glorious TA or RA, whatever they're called, PM, project manager. So he's going to help me out with this. I'm going to conduct an interview with him, and basically we'll just go through that scenario of conducting an interview, and I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about those best practices of while you're in an interview. The most important thing to remember when you're in an interview is be present. Listen actively. If you're in person with them, be on the edge of your chair, looking at them, leaning forward. You want them to know that you're engaged in them. You care about what they're saying. If you're sitting back, you're bored, you're sort of doodling on your notepad, that lack of engagement will close off them. Then you won't be able to really get the deeper insights that you're wanting. So, Boomer, can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. So I'm going to skip the introduction because you've heard that already. But I want you to think back for me to the last time that you went shopping and tell me when was that? Where did you go shopping? And what was it that you were going to shop for?
So I went to Fry's, which is a local grocery store. I went there today, and I went there to get soda, steak, and little Tupperware containers.
Okay. Did you say Fry's as an Frys?
Correct.
Okay. So one thing that, and I'm going to sort of jump back and forth between the interview and then talking about the interview. So forgive me, Boomer. But one thing you want to listen for is vocal cues. When you're in person, you're also watching for visual cues, body language that indicates either discomfort or disinterest or disgust or excitement, and sort of follow up on those and adjust your questioning based on that. So what was your need for steak, Boomer, when you went there?
I made fajitas for dinner tonight.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about how you went through the store to get those 3 items that you said you went for.
So I always go into the store. I take a right to go by the produce to see if anything catches my eye. And then I go...
Sorry for interrupting. And you did that this time? Went to the right?
Correct.
Past the produce? Okay.
Yep.
Go ahead.
And then I go to the back by where the butcher is, and I look for if they have any deals on steak, and then I grab my steak, and then the soda and Tupperware on the other side of the store. So I just kind of make like a big circle.
Okay. So you said that you went to look for deals on steak, but was your objective steak and you were just hoping for a deal, or were you going to only buy steak if there was a deal? And was there a deal?
I was going to get steak either way, and I was just hoping for a deal, and there was one.
Okay. So going between the produce and the steak aisle, what were you kind of looking at? How do you go about, or how did you this time go about looking at the produce? How much time did you spend?
Not very much time. I usually run through, and I guess my biggest thing is asparagus is really expensive. Uh-huh. So I always look to see how the bell peppers and the onions look, and then if asparagus is on sale, I'll always buy asparagus because it's like $5 a pound.
Okay. And
and
is
then I just kind of go on from there.
okay. And was the asparagus not on sale today?
It was not.
Okay. So one of the things, and I'm back to talking about interviewing right now, is you want to draw out stories from people as much as possible, because stories help them talk about their experience. So when I say, tell me about your experience, the way we phrase our questions can help draw those stories out. And the more we get talking about some of these things. So it's really interesting to me, the boomer always is looking for asparagus. And another thing that you can do in an interview is to ask multiple whys. And so at this point, I might say, okay, asparagus, why asparagus? And boomer, why asparagus?
I really like to do a little olive oil, some salt, throw it on the grill, and it's just like a really good like snacking food.
Is there another vegetable like asparagus that does similar things for you that you would look for, or is that the only one?
I'll barbecue onions a lot, and I'll snack on those too.
Okay. And why do you barbecue asparagus as opposed to not barbecuing it? Or you
Uh,
said you throw it on the grill, right?
yeah. I like throwing it on the grill because if you get the heat up really high, you can get like a nice crispness to the outside of it, and then the inside's kind of a little softer. So it's like a nice contrast that's harder to get on like a stovetop.
Okay, cool. So back to talking about the interview. We've just asked 3 whys about asparagus, and the Toyota people, when they're doing product evaluation and how their services go, they always say ask 5 whys. Just keep asking why, keep asking why. And sometimes it feels kind of awkward to ask multiple whys about something as simple as asparagus, but we've just made an interesting discovery about ways to cook asparagus that may or may not be relevant to the shopping application. But knowing that people are thinking, I really love asparagus, but I really love it with a crisper outer shell or crisper surface, that adds nuance, and it adds more details about their lives, so that helps us become more empathetic towards them. So that's another tip. Ask why. Go as deep as 5 whys on a simple subject, even if you think you know the answer, because it will reveal additional things. So the 3 tips we've talked about is watch for body language, listen for vocal cues, ask why multiple times, and then draw out stories. Another tip is to avoid generalized questions, and I've talked a little bit about that already. So rather than how do you usually go shopping, we ask, tell me about your most recent shopping trip. So very specific, allows us to get more detailed, nuanced information about their lives. And you'll notice that Boomer still said, usually I go and to the right. And so I tried to follow up and say, usually you do that, but did you do that this time? Is that what you did this time? So that we could find out whether he's talking about things that he usually does or this actual experience, which will add details to our understanding. So another thing that we need to think about is that people don't always do as they say, and you need to watch for inconsistencies and ask more about them. So I haven't noticed any inconsistencies in our conversation so far, but it's important to understand as a user experience designer and researcher that especially when doing interviews, people will manufacture in their minds their own perception of reality that slightly varies from what really happens, or sometimes greatly varies from what really happens. And so if we rely solely on what people say without digging deeper, just going on the surface, you run a great risk that you're drawing the wrong conclusions because you don't have the detail necessary to be able to draw the right conclusion. Now, when I say that, we should never be, I guess, suspicious of people. That should not be our main perception of how people are. What we should be seeking for is to help people be able to express what really happened as succinctly as possible. And our job is to help them do that, not to catch them in a lie, but to just help them be able to articulate what really happened as they know it did, without some of the gloss that goes over life. So another tip is never fear silence. It often takes people time to sift through their thoughts, so give them a chance. The tendency for most people is to feel really awkward in silence, and that if they don't fill the silence, then their subject will feel uncomfortable too. But people need time to think. People need time to consider what they're about to answer. So always be ready to just let that silence rest and be comfortable with it. And in fact, when we do the assignment tonight, I would encourage you just to let silence reign for like 30 seconds between you and your subject, just to see what it feels like. Another tip I'll bring up right now is don't lead the witness. That is, you should never suggest answers to your questions. People often will give you the answer that they think you want to hear if they perceive that that's what you want to hear. So an example of that would be, so we're talking with Boomer about asparagus. I wouldn't want to say, so you really like asparagus, don't you? That may be true, but it's also removing his freedom to answer himself what he wants to answer. You also wouldn't say is something like, you wouldn't want to grill onions, would you? Sometimes we ask questions of people in that way, that the way we feel about something, and you're trying to get reaffirmation of how you feel about something. That type of questioning has no place in user experience research, because it's not it basically muddies up the responses that you get and the quality of the data that you're gathering. So let's go back. I need to open my guide again really quick so I can see what the next questions I want to ask are. Okay, Boomer, what did you purchase, if anything, that you had not planned to purchase before entering this store?
Nothing today.
Okay. Where did you go right after being in this store?
I went to my motorcycle and drove home.
Okay, so you came home.
Yep.
And what did you do after that?
I marinated the steak for cooking later, along with the asparagus.
Okay. Did you use, sorry, what did you use for marinade? Actually, let me pause there. I was trying to do a follow-up question, and I began to say, did you use? And one of the next tips that I was going to share with you is to never ask yes or no questions. The worst thing that you can have in an interview is just a person saying yeah, no, and responding to your questions, because that essentially is you leading and deciding ahead of time what it is that they're talking about. So I would say always avoid using yes or no questions. So tell me, let's backtrack a little bit. Tell me about choosing the Tupperware that you were buying. What was it that you were looking for, and how did you make a decision on what to buy?
So I needed something. So I make fajitas, and I make them kind of in bulk, and then I leave them in the fridge. So I needed a Tupperware container that I could reheat the fajita in, and then throw some lettuce on top and make like a little fajita salad. And everything, the way that I decided the size is everything I have right now is too big or too small. So I was trying to find something like right on that middle ground.
Okay. And what was the process that you used to actually find the right size? Did you use any sort of methodology?
I just eyeballed it, no methodology.
Okay. That's understandable. Okay. So how often do you actually do this with fajitas?
I probably do about once a week. I make enough they last 4 or 5 days.
Okay, great. Sounds like a lot of fajitas, which I love. So that's good. All right. So the last tip I will give you for interviews is if you have questions that are somewhat sensitive or tough to answer or might in any way affect the participants' demeanor toward you, save those questions for the end. This is a tip that I learned when I was in journalism, learning how to interview people. You gather all the information that you need that's simple to get, people don't care about. And then if you have a tough question, you save it for the end because they might just walk out on you. And if you don't save it to the end, then you've lost your chance to get all the stuff that they don't have any problem answering. In user experience design, I've never really had any issues with people walking out on me, but sometimes you need to ask tough questions based on what it is, whatever it is that you're trying to design for. Some scenarios might be a little more personal, and as a user experience designer, you may be touching on things that people are sensitive about. So it's good to do that both sensitively and saving those things so that you don't have to worry about losing any other data if they decide that they don't want to participate anymore, or if they clam up and don't want to talk to you anymore. Okay, so that's the conducting interviews best practices. We've got a few minutes left. I just want to review our assignment for today. Oops. Okay, assignment for day 2 is to conduct a 25-minute interview. So we asked you yesterday to try to round somebody up to be able to interview during this time period so you can ask them about shopping. If you, for some reason, were not able to round somebody up for this interview, then we will try to pair people up and let you interview each other as students. So let us know if you need to do that, and Boomer can help coordinate getting people matched up in order to be able to do this interview. So for this interview, I want you to duplicate the interviewed guide template, and there's a link in the assignment document. I'm going to post this assignment document in Slack right now. So you'll be able to have access to the instructions. So duplicate the interview guide template so that you have it. Review the objective statement, get it in your mind. Review primary and probe questions so that you're more familiar with them. Add any additional questions that you'd like based on either what we've heard in my interview with Boomer or anything that you think would be useful to know. Then begin recording the interview if you can. I realize that I didn't ask you to prepare for recording an interview. And so if you don't have a recording device, that's okay. The purpose of this is for you to capture some of that information and try to just keep notes of it. So at the very minimum, keep notes either on your computer or on a notepad, whatever you have handy for today. Begin recording the interview, conduct the interview using the principles taught in the class. Include reading through that introductory guide, because I think it's important to be able to understand how that feels as you're going through an interview and be able to share that with somebody else. Conduct the interview, take notes as appropriate in the interview guide. So just as you're going through, next to each question, hit a return and then write any notes that you have as you've asked that question so that we have it in sort of context. If you're doing the interview with a recording and you can see the recording device's time code counter, write down what time it was so you can go back and review if you want to. Immediately after the interview, I would like you to write down the 10 most important insights that you gleaned from the interview. The insights could include several about shopping, the shopping experience itself, and then a few about what you learned or could improve on in a future interview. And I want you to stretch yourselves a little bit, because this asking about shopping, it's something that everybody does, and it's something that you've all had experiences with. But I'm hoping that you'll use this time to sort of expand beyond your own experience, dig deeper, so that you see something from somebody else that even if it might not seem relevant, if it's something at all surprising to you or something you may not have known or hadn't expected, definitely write that down. But also write down some of the mundane stuff that you might expect and would have expected to happen. Anyway, so write down at least 10 of the most important insights that you gleaned from the interview, and then also a few about what you learned or could improve on a future interview. Then, if available, review the recording at any point and any of those notes that you jotted down, just to listen to it again, just for a couple of minutes. Write down any verbatim quotes that you can that are useful. Once you've done that, you'll be getting back together with your small groups again, like yesterday. Boomer will be putting in the link to the Zoom meeting so that you can get put into groups. During those groups, I want you to be making a master list of insights that you gather from everybody in the group about shopping, and then discuss some of those insights gained by the group. Share those things that seemed most compelling to you with each other. Compile that list, and then eventually you'll be using the insights on that list to help generate ideas in one of the later classes for products around the shopping experience. But for now, though, we're just capturing those raw insights and putting them into a document. And also in your groups, once you've done that, please share with each other any insights or questions about the interview process, things that went well, things that you might want to change if you were to do an interview again. And what did you learn about yourself from the process? Is it a strength? Is it a weakness for you to try and do interviews? Being self-aware about these things allows you to find ways that then you can make improvements or changes that will help you become a better user experience designer. So that's the assignment for today. I've just got a couple more minutes, and I'll use some time to ask and answer questions if people have them. And remember to fill out the form that Boomer will be posting to do attendance for today, and just to show us that you've been able to come and what was valuable, and to know if we can make improvements on this course at all. Let's see, someone said, can you show the list of questions as well so I can see how you switch between questions? So let's go back to the interview guide really quickly. Hopefully this will be helpful. I wasn't showing this while I was doing the actual interview. When you have enough experience doing interviews, you tend to meander a little bit more. No, you can come back to the list. And so I did a few follow-up questions that weren't in my actual interview list. And usually I'll go down a tangent and find the information. So like when we were talking about asparagus, that wasn't something that I had planned to talk about. It was a little bit of an interesting tangent. I wasn't sure how far it would be useful to me, but I asked a few whys there. And then after that, I could come back and say, okay, the asparagus was interesting. So then I come back to this question about, oh, what did you purchase, if anything, that you had not planned to purchase before entering the store? So if he had purchased asparagus, then that would have been something that wasn't on his plan, and it might have discovered at that point. But basically, with each of these main questions, I'll follow a tangent as long as I need to, as long as I feel like I'm getting relevant information. And then once I'm done, I will come back to the next question in the line. Where did you go afterwards, or what were you doing before going to the store? I actually ended up skipping that one because I had closed it out and wasn't looking at it again. Hopefully that answered your question. Are there any other questions that anyone has before I close this class for today? So the question came over, does each question have a purpose? So as I was writing these questions, I did have a purpose for each one. And what I was doing as I was writing the questions was to try to figure out what are all of the areas and information surrounding this shopping experience that might add relevant information that could help me move forward in the interview process. So I wanted to, the what, the where, the why, and what the outcome with that first question. What store did you go to? What was the reason? What did you purchase that you had not planned to purchase? That's opening up a question about, some people just go with a list to go to the store, but others may not have a list. And so what we're doing is just adding as much information as we can, and layer upon layer. What were you doing before going to the store? What did you go afterwards? So this could help inform a product that might help people in the store process, shopping process, either before or after. There might be pain points that they run into that we could address. So I'm just trying to find lots of different nuances to this scenario. Janine asked if do we submit this one to you similar to last night's? You don't need to submit this to me tonight. I just want you to have your list of information that you can share within the group tonight so that you can just discuss among yourselves. It's just going to be a list. Eventually, I'll probably be having you guys pull up those lists again for use in a later class. But for me, you don't need to submit them to me tonight. Just have them. Okay, yeah. So we're looking for people with needing partners to put them in Slack, and yeah, it looks like all the questions. If you need a partner to interview, please put your name in the Slack, and Boomer will help you get set up with somebody else to interview. You can each interview each other, one for 25 minutes, then the next person for the other 25 minutes. Just go back and forth.
And then
I'm going to sign off for now.
Can I just say one quick thing?
Yeah, for sure.
Somebody asked a question and I accidentally removed it instead of answering it. Okay. And they asked if you were going to share those questions. And if you go into the Slack, there's a Google Doc that has this guide in there.
Yeah.
So that was for Prabha. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. But I accidentally removed your question instead of answering it. So I just wanted you to know that it is in the Slack and a Google Doc.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. So within the assignment file, there's also a link to that document as well. So hopefully you'll be able to access that interview guide. It's got all the questions in it and the introduction and the objective. Adjust it and adapt it after you've saved a copy as much as you need. And it's great to be with you again tonight. Some more fun things coming tomorrow, and especially Thursday. We're going to do some ideation. So I'm excited for that. I'm going to sign off now. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow.